Every time I see you on the cover of a magazine, they've got some menacing title like the Enforcer, and they've got you wielding some sort of a weapon. And I wanted our audience to know that you've got more than one side. So I wanted to start tonight by letting you see what Commissioner Roger Goodell is like on the first night of the NFL draft with some of the biggest, baddest NFL football players you'd ever see. If you could run the first clip, please.
I don't know what to say to that.
What's with all the hugs? You know, is that how it works in the NFL?
You know, it was something that was completely natural. It happened about 4 years ago, and I would say to start with it, the night of the draft and being a part of that, and the part of those young men starting their NFL career, reaching their dream of being an NFL player, is really one of the greatest moments in my job, frankly, to share that moment with them. And to think that it's not emotional, it is incredibly emotional, and you see it. And a lot of what you see there is defensive, because those guys come out, they're a lot bigger than I am, as you can see. And I'm trying to protect myself. But they're reaching that moment, and they realize that now an NFL player, they know which team they're going to, and there's a great sense of relief. And they let you feel it, and so I really enjoy that moment.
We're in New York, and I want to talk to you at some length about the Super Bowl. Your predecessor, Paul Tagliabue, was on the 92nd Street Y stage in 2006, right at the end of his long tenure and just before yours began. And he was asked if he could ever see a day when the new open-air stadium for the Giants and the Jets could host a Super Bowl. And I thought his answer was interesting. He said that one of his weaknesses is that he can never rule out a nutty idea. And I'm wondering, when you think about tonight's weather and the idea of having an open-air game in the heart of winter, is there anything a little bit nutty about what's about to happen?
No, I think it's what football's all about. I really do. I think when you think back of the classic games in our history, weather's been a big part of that, whether it's the Ice Bowl and just even on Sunday afternoon. You see the Packers and the 49ers going at it in front of close to 50 million people on television at Lambeau Field. That's a special moment. And weather's a part of football, and that's one of the things that makes us unique. And I think it's going to be a great thing for this region, but I also think it's going to be a great thing for the NFL.
Now, some people don't know how this works. You don't actually pick the Super Bowls. You don't have a vote, right? But when the owners...
If it goes well, the owners did it. If it goes poorly, I did it. That's the way it works.
But when the owners were debating this one, and there was considerable debate, as I imagine there always is, and I think it came down to this stadium or Tampa. Yeah. You weren't exactly a neutral party. Weren't you encouraging the game in New York in part because it sort of fed this innovative trend that you want the NFL to be a leader in?
Well, as you know, I can't take a position on the Super Bowl, so I did not take a position. I was perfectly supportive of it. If the owners selected that, I thought we could execute on it. They asked, can we do this? Can we do it the right way? And I think this region made a terrific bid that really caught the attention of the owners. And to be in the #1 market on the biggest stage with our greatest event, that's a real great opportunity for the owners. And I think they saw it that way. And they said, we want to do this. And I give a lot of credit to the ownership of the Jets and the Giants, Woody Johnson on the Jets side, and the John Mara and his family, and the Tisch family. They believed in this vision. They went out. They worked hard to campaign for it, because you do have to get votes for it. And they convinced the ownership this is the right thing.
So is it fair to say that this is potentially precedent setting? That is, if this, depending on how this goes, we could see a Super Bowl in Philly or in Buffalo?
Well, I guess I would start with this. I think this is obviously innovative, and I think it's going to be something new. But it's also unique because we're in New York, and this is a stage, and we have two teams here. Every city can't host a Super Bowl just because of the sheer enormity of this event. And it's not just a football game. We have a week full of events. We'll probably have well over 150,000 people coming into the New York region for this event. They won't all be at the stadium, even though they'll all say they're at the stadium, but they will want to be here just to be part of the Super Bowl. And that's, so I think we start with 30,000 hotel rooms. We start with a stadium that has to hold 70,000 people. The infrastructure for all those events, not every city probably can handle that kind of thing. And so I think our options are limited. Will we look at other cities that are in cold weather sites? I think we'll wait and make that evaluation later.
I wanted to give our audience a little better idea of what might happen here. Just a few weeks ago, there was a game in Philadelphia between the Lions and the Eagles, and weather certainly had an impact in that game. Can you run the second clip, please? I love that Calvin Johnson shot. So when you see that, you touched on this a minute ago, but do you see in any way the potential for a game that wouldn't represent the NFL, or is that real football to you?
That is real football. Those games count. We had, as a matter of fact, that was week 14, I believe. We had 5 games in snow conditions. We may have championship games, the game preceding the Super Bowl, in bad weather. That's part of what our game's all about. And so you play in the conditions. And I think people love that. And that's what I think our team's embraced. We're embracing playing in the climate and the cold weather. We're assuming that when we came here. We didn't expect for it to be 75 degrees and sunny. We know where we're playing. We know the time of year. And this is something that we're embracing and think it's going to be great for the game.
One of your executives, Frank Supovitz, said that he thinks watching the NFL in the snow is really romantic.
He's got a different definition of romantic than I do. But yeah, I did read that with interest, yes.
But he actually said that some snow, might be fun. It's kind of a rite of passage. Just for the record, you're not rooting for snow, are you?
How about flurries? I'd be great. I think it would be, I would use a different term, mythological. It's part of the mythology of the NFL. And you see that game and you see the snow coming down. It's really neat. And so I wouldn't mind at all seeing some flurries. You want to make sure that we're not in any way interfering with public safety and making sure that that is a line that we're going to make sure we draw. And I think we will.
I'll conclude the weather section of this program by pointing out that there's actually a website called Will It Snow by AccuWeather that is solely set up to predict whether it will snow on February 2nd.
And what's the latest been?
The latest is no, but it did snow on February 2nd last year. So there you go. Before we leave the Super Bowl topic, I know that Super Bowl guarantees are tricky, but I'm going to ask you to make one tonight. Can you guarantee that the lights will stay on the whole game?
I'll tell you a funny story. Why I'm so confident, not to mention the fact that our staff, obviously the New Jersey utility has been great in working through all that, but when the lights went out last year, I was standing right next to Governor Christie. And the lights go out, and he immediately gets on his phone and comes back in a couple minutes. And I said, what was that all about? He says, I was calling my guy in New Jersey. This isn't happening next year, I promise you that. And I think he's serious. And so I think the governor will, and the people there, they've taken all the necessary precautions, and I'm confident that'll be the case.
So we've got a pretty adult crowd here. Let me just ask you, when that happened, particularly since you're standing next to Governor Christie, what was the first thing you said when the blackout happened?
I'll be honest with you, I don't even remember what my reaction was. I think like everybody, you're trying to figure out what's happening. The good news is that the Secretary of Defense was in the box also with me, 2 rows, and the Attorney General was standing on my right, and I have the governor on my left. So if they had left the box, I would have probably been a little more concerned, but they stayed in their box and they were comfortable. And then it was just about trying to communicate, try to understand what was going on and how we got the lights back on and back into resumption of play. And when I look back at it now, it probably was more stressful than I thought, but I was confident that our people would get it solved quickly.
I wanted to spend some time talking to you about player safety, not just because it's been in the news so much, but because you have identified it to fans as your top priority. You gave a speech at the Harvard Public School of Health in which you said the biggest challenge is changing the culture of football in a way that reduces injury as much as possible, particularly head injuries. I have a couple specific questions, but I wanted to go big picture first. Do you agree that this issue of player safety and head injury is the existential threat to professional football? This is the one you have to get right, because the question is whether your product, when done as intended, can really cause lasting damage?
No, I think that player health and safety is important to us because we want our players to not only be healthy during their careers, but after their careers. And that's why we put so much emphasis into it. And I think concussions are an issue that affect all sports. And we want our kids to play sports. I'm a big believer in sports. I played 3 sports myself. I think there's so much that you get out of playing sports. It's whether it's the hard work or the values of the game. In football, I think it's the greatest team game going. And I want to see people play the game because I benefited from that. And the things that I learned in football are things that I still use today in my business and in my personal life. So this is a great game. And what I want to do is make sure that we get back to the fundamentals of football and to make sure that we recognize using the head is not the way it was designed to be played. The helmet, as an example, is there for protection. It's not there for a weapon. And we have to get away from the techniques that are using the helmet to be used in a tackling or a blocking scheme. It's to use the shoulders, to use the arms, and to wrap. And so we're getting back into the fundamentals of football. And I think this is really important for us, not just at the NFL level, but at the high school level, the college level, and youth football.
So you've framed it very much as a case of the long-term health of the players at every level. Mm-hmm. Do you also think that it is a challenge to the long-term health of the league itself?
Well, the league is very healthy. I've never been more optimistic about where the NFL is going and where the game of football is going, because we are doing the right things. We are investing in research. We're getting medical research that is giving us answers to complex problems. We understand more about the brain. We understand more about injuries in general. And medicine has evolved to a point where any injury you have is treated in a more efficient, more successful manner, because that's what medicine is. And it's something that I think we have to invest in. We have to continue to make that progress. And that's why we put hundreds of millions of dollars just in the last few years into that type of research, which is going to provide answers and help not just football, but all sports.
You mentioned the benefits of playing sports at a young age. Participation in youth football is down, as you know, and that is the case in part because parents are following this debate, and a lot of them are worried about the potential risk to their kids' safety. If we start with the premise that the decision of whether kids should play youth football is the parents' decision, parents often look for advice from experts on what to do. So let me ask you, my son is 2, going on 3 this summer. He's already a football fan, gets that from his dad and the long line of fellers. What would your advice be to me? Should he play football?
Yes, but I would also tell you that it's important whether your son plays football, basketball, lacrosse, that you make sure that the people that are supervising him, the coaches in particular, are teaching the right techniques and that they're involved in the right way. You want that. And I want that for my twin daughters who play lacrosse and soccer. Soccer has a very high incidence of concussions. Participation is down in most every sport. And I think part of that's several issues. One is there is a focus on specialization. My girls in 5th grade were told if they want to continue in lacrosse, they should play it 2 or 3 of the seasons, which would prevent them from playing other sports. I don't think that's good for our kids. I think that can put too much stress on children, and I think they should play multiple sports. They're better athletes. So yes, I would encourage your son to play football. I would encourage him to play other sports. I think this is something that's good for kids, and we should be encouraging our kids to do it safely.
When you talk about the culture changing, I think we saw some of that this past weekend in a rather incredible wild card weekend. The Chiefs lost their star running back Jamal Charles very early in the game to a concussion, and then in the Saints game, one of their star players, Keenan Lewis, had concussion symptoms, and for those of you who didn't see the game, it was notable because this player was pleading on the sidelines to come back in, to his coaches, to the medical staff, to anybody who talked to him, and it was apparent that they had taken his helmet away to keep him from going in, and following the new concussion protocol. Both of those decisions affected very much those games. Is that part of actually progress in changing the culture, that we're saying, to the players and to the fans, look, we're not messing around with this anymore?
Absolutely. The most important thing we can do is, when you have this injury, is to make sure that you treat it conservatively, that you fully recover from it. The last thing you want to do is have a player go back in before he's fully recovered, probably from any injury, but in particular with the head. And so what we've done is taken steps to, one, try to prevent it. That's with proper equipment, with trying to adjust the rules so that we take the head out of the game. But also, as it relates to when the injury does occur, to treat it conservatively and to make sure that we have spotters at the game that can identify when a player may have suffered a hit that should just be evaluated. We don't know whether the individual's had a concussion, but you evaluate that individual so that you can make that medical decision. To have extra medical experts on the sidelines, because there is so much going on. Can we make sure that we have enough eyes on the field, and also make sure that when an injury occurs, we can make the proper evaluation? So players want to play. We have to recognize that, and we have to also make sure that they get the best possible medical care. And I believe they are in the NFL.
So do you think fans and players are sort of catching up to this culture?
Yes, I do. I think it's a complete shift, but in any culture change, it doesn't happen overnight. Ben, it's something that you have to continually stress. You have to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that our players are as safe as possible.
A couple more on this. A few months ago, there was an investigative book and documentary that came out, as I know you know, called League of Denial. And I wanted to ask you about this in particular because it asserted something extraordinary, basically contrary to what you're saying, which is that the NFL actively tried to minimize the dangers of concussions and hide any connection between football and brain damage. And I know that protecting the integrity of the game is your singular imperative. When you see a book like that, I just wanted to ask you directly, since that challenges the integrity of the game, what is your response? Was there in any way a cover-up? Absolutely not. In fact, the NFL has been leaders in this area. Since the 90s, we identified this. We had a committee of experts, independent experts, medical experts, that studied this issue. The NFLPA participated in all of that. So all of the information that this committee studied was shared with the players. It was also shared publicly by being published. We have driven the awareness of this issue. We have driven the medical study of this issue. And I think that's been good for society. And I'm proud of what the NFL has done on that front. And I believe that we're going to have an even greater impact because of the millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars that we're investing. We are going to discover not only more about this injury, but also the brain that will affect brain disease. One of the things I'm most proud about is not what we're doing just for football and other sports, but we're also working with our military that are dealing with these injuries, traumatic brain injuries, and how to deal with them. And changing the culture of the military. It's not much different than the player wanting to go on the field. The soldier wants to go back on the field, the battlefield. And so we call it the return to field protocol. They call it the return to battlefield protocol. And they have shared a lot of the research, a lot of the findings, and a lot of the things that we've done. We're making a difference, and I'm proud of that. On the research you've mentioned a couple times, just one question on this. There was an interesting piece that ran in the New York Times last week by a prominent doctor, in which he essentially said that the concussion focus is all wrong, that it's not about helmets and preventing force on the outside. It's inside the head and the slosh of the brain, if you will. Is that the kind of scientific question that the NFL wants to explore?
Yes, Ben, because we're not making the decisions about where we should put the money for research. The NIH is doing that. That's what we're funding. And so the National Institutes of Health are making those decisions. Where should we be putting our money to study? How should we do that? They're the leading scientists in the world. They're the ones that are making those decisions, not the NFL. I think there are a lot of areas that need to be studied when it comes to the brain. And I think most medical experts you talk to will say, we know less about the brain than any other part of our body, and we need to put more research into it. I think the president's acknowledged that with some of the funding he's put forth through NIH. So we're moving in the right direction, and I believe that we're playing a leadership role in that, and as I say, I'm very proud of that.
Let's talk about the state of the game more broadly. It's never been more popular, as you've noted by any measure. All of the most watched TV shows in any given season are football games. It ranks as the most popular sport. When people are asked about that question, the playoff games from this past weekend, the first round, all of them were watched more than any State of the Union address in recent years. I was thinking just the other day that the U.S. government shut down for 16 days this fall, and most people kind of went about their business. But if the NFL shut down for 1 week, I think you'd see people in the street, including me.
Well, to that point, the blackout last year in the Super Bowl was the second highest rated television show in history. The blackout, just that 34 minutes, by the way. That's pretty good.
So the question is, how would you describe the NFL's role, its place in American culture right now?
The thing I'm excited about where the NFL has such an influence is I think we bring people together. What makes football special to me is not just the game, the strategy, the beauty, the teamwork, but it's really how people have said, that's going to bring my family and my friends together and share in that experience. And we work hard at that. We want to bring communities together. We want to bring family and friends together. And to get around, whether it's a Super Bowl or Sunday afternoon or a Monday night, we want them to experience the game together. And our job is to try to give them more ways to connect with the game, to engage as fans, whether it's fantasy football or whether it's watching the red zone or watching on their mobile device. We want to get fans engaged and be part of it and invite people in to experience it. And that's exciting for us. And when we do, fans respond to it very positively.
You're also in a period where scoring is up, the highest scoring season ever. I was really struck by one of the stats that your league put out, that 70% of the games this year were within one score in the fourth quarter, so very close. And you've had 11 straight years where at least one team that was in last place in the division went on to be in the first place. And obviously you've got this Peyton Manning, Tom Brady rivalry for the ages, and we might see it one more time, at least in the playoffs. As you look at it in perspective, are we sort of in this glory period of football, that serious health issues notwithstanding, or does every generation, say that and kind of forget about the previous ones?
Well, I think the game has obviously never been more popular. It's never been more successful, but I think our best days are ahead of us. And this is just finished my 7th year as commissioner, I believe. And every year we've continued to see every one of our metrics for fans, whether it's attendance or ratings or engagement on mobile devices and new platforms or fantasy football, they're engaging more. And I often say there's never been a better time to be an NFL fan than right now, because you can interact with football so much. And that's what we're trying to do. And so I believe our growth will continue. I think it will continue because we're not going to be complacent about it. We're not accepting that our success in the past is going to make us successful going forward. We have work to do, we have challenges to meet, and we will meet them. And we will never accept the position we have with the public trust or the public interest in our game with complacency. We will do it, we will be aggressive, and we will continue to grow our game.
Let me ask you about a couple of potential changes to that game that a lot of fans would be interested in. The NFL may change the playoff structure so that you reseed the teams after teams qualify, so that, for example, a team like San Francisco, which won 12 games this year, wouldn't have to travel to Green Bay, which had 8 wins. I know that the league has traditionally protected the rights of the division winner for the home game, but it seems like there's conversation, if not momentum, about reseeding. What's your position on that?
I don't think there is momentum for that. I would probably disagree. I mean, there may be momentum in the media, and that happens when you see, San Francisco going to Green Bay. But one of the premises we start with every season is that your first objective is to win the division. And when you win the division, you should have a home game. And we've discussed this for decades in the NFL. And we believe that that's the right priority. And when you do, you should have that home game. I don't see the owners pushing for a big change on that. And that's ultimately where it has to come from. So I know that's been discussed in the media, but I don't see that happening.
What about the idea of expanding the number of teams that make the playoffs, adding additional wild card in each conference?
That is under serious consideration. We think it's one of the great things about the NFL, besides the fact it's unscripted, but every team starts and their fans start the season with hope. You mentioned the fact that we've had for 11 straight years a team go from last to first. That's unique to professional football in the NFL. That doesn't happen in other sports. And that's because we have such a competitive league. And we want to keep that. And so the races, this past season, we have 16 games every weekend. The final weekend, we have every division game. So your opponent is a division opponent. And 13 of those 16 games had playoff implications on the final day of the season. That's extraordinary, and we want to keep that. If we could increase that, and again, this is about believing in better. Can you make it better? Can you make those races even more exciting by adding 2 more teams? That's compelling, and that's what we're looking at. Would this make it even more exciting and more dramatic as we get down into that race to who's going to make it to the playoffs? And frankly, because the league is so competitive, you could come into the playoffs at 8-8 and win the Super Bowl if you're playing your best football then. And there are a number of teams that finished 8-8 were playing pretty well, and I know other teams said, boy, I hope we don't have to play them in the playoffs. They're dangerous. You get on that roll, and you can win it. We saw it with the Giants several years ago. They got hot at the right time, and they won the Super Bowl.
You talk a lot more about that. So do you think that's likely?
I don't know about likely. I think it's something that the competition committee looked at last year and thinks there's some real benefits from a competitive standpoint. They're going to study some aspects of that because when do you play those games? Because it really is focusing on when would those games occur. And one team would get a bye in each conference, and you'd have 3 games on each, 6 games on the weekend. So would you have 3 on Saturday and 3 on Sunday, or would you have 1 on Friday and 2 on Saturday, 2 on Sunday, and 1 on Monday? I think those are the kind of things that we want to continue to evaluate.
Okay. The league found itself in a new kind of controversy this year with the bullying issue that happened in Miami. Jonathan Martin, a player for the Dolphins, left the team and essentially said that he was a victim of bullying from one or more of his teammates. And I know that is under investigation, so let me ask you a broader question. Because even casual fans have heard about hazing, rookie hazing, but not really about bullying, which you don't associate with professional football players. Do you think bullying exists in the NFL?
Well, again, are you defining bullying or hazing? Those are probably different terms.
I'm asking about the issue of bullying, which the Martin case raised.
Well, I think everyone in the NFL or in any workplace environment deserves to have an environment where they can work without any type of issues impacting their ability to be successful and to show up and work. And that's what I've asked an independent counsel to look at, where there are issues here that were going on that were inappropriate, whether they, for whatever reason, they didn't allow Jonathan Martin the opportunity to pursue his career. That is something we believe in, and we believe that everyone should. And I think you could make a strong argument that in the NFL, we are the most significant in the sense that you play it based on performance. You play if you're a good player. They don't care whether you're black, white, or what your background is. You play because you can contribute to the team. And we have to make sure that we keep an environment that is professional, respectful, most importantly, to the game, to your fellow teammates, to opponents, and including that to officials. I want our players to all respect one another where we come from. And we have 2,000 young men in any given year. And when we find out the facts, we'll deal with that appropriately.
So in the stage we're in with this story now, is it clear to you whether this case sort of shines a light on something that might be happening in other locker rooms, that we might need to see some changes that affect the whole NFL, or is it too early to say?
Well, I think it's too early to say based on this specific case in Miami. I want to see the facts before I make any judgments on that, but we are already beginning discussions with players and others. What should we be thinking about to make sure we're ensuring that proper workplace environment? And we want to do that. We're committed to doing that, and we will do that.
I wanted to ask you about a quick one on officiating.
There's no such thing, Ben, as a quick one on officiating.
Do you get the fans' frustration watching a game and seeing a call, maybe even a call that could cost a team a game, like the San Diego game recently, where they made it into the playoffs, and a call that could have helped them get in, kept the Steelers out? Or do those of us watching at home really not fully get how complicated it is? Because I've been, through years of watching games where just there's a level of fan frustration about the officiating. I'm wondering what it's like for you when you see a call that just is wrong.
Well, fortunately, it doesn't happen very often. But when you do see a mistake, it is frustrating. I understand the fans' frustration. I'm a fan also, but I take it even more personally because that's one of our functions, is to make sure we maintain the integrity of the game through proper officiating. So when you do see that, it's discouraging and it's something that we believe we have great officiating, but we can always get better. We have looked at ways to improve it, whether that's be full-time officiating in certain positions or with a certain number of officials, developmental squads. Instant replay has been, I think, very impactful and helpful in trying to reverse mistakes, obvious mistakes. And you're seeing more as fans. And one of the things that I would say from a fan's perspective is what you're seeing now in a football game is so much more than what you saw 5 years ago or 10 years ago, primarily because of technology. Because of super slow-mo, high definition, those cameras, you're seeing expression on guys' face. They're things that you never saw before. And that highlights how close some of these calls really are. But it also reinforces how accurate our officials are. I believe our officials can get better. We've made some mistakes that we want to correct, and we were committed to making some changes to get to a better place from an officiating standpoint. But I'm also incredibly proud of the job they do. It is a very difficult job. It's very fast. And it's something that I have great respect for them, but I also believe we can do better.
The growth of the league is another area that you have pursued vigorously, particularly overseas. There's going to be 3 NFL games in London next year. I'm not sure the average football fan has caught on to just how interested you are in the overseas footprint of the NFL, and I'm curious kind of what your dream vision is here besides London. I mean, do you see this as something where we might have games in other European cities? Might we have a Super Bowl overseas?
Well, Ben, I guess I'd start with, my dream is to grow the game. And what we're doing from an international standpoint is, one, pursuing opportunities to do that, but it's also responding to the interest. The fans want to see football. We're not a global game right now. It's not played on a global basis. But when people have the opportunity to experience football, whether it's on television or live games, they want more. And London's a great example of that. We started with preseason games. They called them friendlies, meaning they realized that the best players weren't playing and they didn't count. We then said, we'll change our strategy. We're going to bring live regular season games, and they count. And they responded incredibly well and said, we want more. So we went to 2 games. We sold that out in a matter of hours. Now we've gone to 3, and sales are at the same pace. So we're pretty excited about where we are. And I think what it is while our game isn't globally played and it's not accepted as a global game, when we put our efforts to market the game and bring the game to a particular region, they respond saying we want more. And so I believe that is an opportunity for us to grow.
What's the possibility here?
I think it's possible if we continue to have the success in London that we would have a franchise there. We play our Super Bowls in cities that have NFL franchises, so I don't think we play a Super Bowl internationally without a franchise there. But you know, the first step here is to continue the growth pattern, and if we can do that, it's reasonable from a logistical standpoint and a competitive standpoint to do it right in London, and we're pretty excited about that.
So which do you think is more likely to happen first, a franchise in London or a franchise in Los Angeles?
I knew where that was coming from. So, you know, I don't know what will be first, and I'm not sure I care. I think I'd like to see if we can be successful in both, ultimately. I believe there are a lot of fans in Southern California who'd love to have a franchise. We need to get a stadium solution there and to do it right. And when we can, we'll be back there. The same is true if we continue to grow in London. If we can do it right, we'll do it.
So you mentioned earlier about the receding question, sort of the perception that can play out publicly about whether there's movement. Can you give us a sense of whether there's any actual movement in getting a team in Los Angeles anytime soon?
Yeah, there's a lot of interest in it. And I think there are some stadium alternatives that are developing that show a lot of promise and potential. But until we have that solution, we're not going to be there. And so we're trying to figure out how to do that on the fastest timetable. But again, the real issue for us is do it right. When we can get back there and do it properly, then that's a good moment for, I think, Southern Californian football fans, but also the NFL.
One of the other issues that stays on the desk of the NFL commissioner, it seems, is the name of the Washington Redskins. President Obama even weighed in on this recently when asked about it, and gave some more lift to the issue by suggesting that, you know, the team name should be changed if it's deemed offensive, which to some it is. I know you spent some time on this recently. What's your current stand on whether the team name should stand?
Well, I think, and I don't have the quote in front of me from the president exactly word for word, but I think he said if there's substantial concern, that's something the ownership should consider. And we understand that, but if you start with the facts, the latest poll from Native Americans is 9 out of 10 don't think it's offensive. 9 out of 10 Native Americans don't think it's offensive. From a general population, I've never seen it be less than 8 out of 10 believe that the Redskins name is not offensive. So, you know, the reality of it is we have to listen if people feel like this name is inappropriate. We are doing that. I have met with groups. The Redskins are doing that actively. The name is the name of a football team. It has had 80-year tradition. It's always been presented in a positive light. And it's something that we will continue to evaluate, we will continue to work, and we will try to make sure that we're making the right long-term decision.
Speaking of Washington, you come from a family of politics. Your dad, as many in our audience might know, Charlie Goodell, was a U.S. congressman who went on to become a U.S. senator from New York. He was appointed to that seat following the assassination of Robert Kennedy, and it's a well-known part of your dad's biography that his stand against Vietnam cost him politically. When you think about your dad and you sort of reflect on your NFL career, which has been more than half of your life, how does his life affect how you run the league?
Every day. The most important thing to me is the lesson I learned from my father's career. He loved politics. He loved public service, and he loved being a United States Senator. And he knew when he took the position that was against the Republican Party that there'd be backlash and that it would risk whether he could continue as a United States Senator. Ultimately, he was right. But he stood up for what he believed, and he had the courage to do that. And I take a great lesson in that, and I always have in my life, and my brothers do also. My father stood up for what was right, knowing the risk that he would likely lose that election. That stayed with me, and I believe that while you have to do what's right, you have to have the courage to do what's right when you realize it. And he did, so I'm proud of that, and it affects the way I look at my job every day. I have to try to find out what's right, but most importantly, when I find that, I have to have the courage to try to do that.
you compare being commissioner to being Speaker of the House, because ultimately, if you want policy change, you have to get the votes. In your case, 24 out of 32 of the owners to agree on a change. Do you like the politics of the job?
Yes, I do, and I'll tell you why. We have 32 owners. They each have one vote, and for most significant policies, we have to get 24 votes. I love that challenge, and I look at it as a challenge. I don't look at it as politics. I look at it as a challenge. If we can develop solutions that can generate at least 24 votes out of 32 from very successful business people, then we probably have a pretty good solution. And I think that has really been the core of the success of the NFL over the years and why it's grown to be such a successful story. We have created a business model, the owners have, that have allowed all 32 teams to compete. We share our revenue. We'll be approaching 85% shareable revenue pretty soon for each team. So that allows the New York Giants and the Green Bay Packers and the New Orleans Saints to compete on the same level. That is something that is fundamental to our league. And you combine that with the salary cap that restricts the amount of money you can pay on players within the collective bargaining agreement. It's a very dynamic system, and it's allowed us to be successful in all markets. And I think that's good for the fans. I think it's good for the game. I think it's good for the players.
I've got two more questions, and then we're going to take some here from the audience. One other piece I noticed in the media, there was a columnist for ESPN, Howard Bryant, who wrote a provocative column recently in which he said that the NFL, and because of the pain that players suffer and the public rarely sees every day, should allow its players to use medical marijuana. And of course, that's been on the front pages in here in New York because of the governor's suggestions, but it's part of a broader American story where states are starting to take this up selectively. As commissioner, can you envision a day under your watch where players would be allowed to use medical marijuana if it's legal in that state?
Well, Ben, let me start with, because I think there's a myth out there and there's a misunderstanding about the health of our players. In fact, our players live longer and higher quality lives than the general male population. And it's close to 3 years. So our players are living healthy and long lives and higher quality lives. What do I mean by higher quality? Their income levels are higher. Their divorce rate is lower. Their suicide level is less than half of what the general male population. So I believe that while we have challenges and we have programs set up to deal with individual issues that our players may develop over their lives, and we want to help them transition through life in a successful way, whether it's a physical or a mental or anything we can do to help them transition from a career to a career. I believe our players are getting the right kind of services, and we'll never stop trying to improve on that. I don't know what's going to develop as far as the next opportunity in medicine to evolve and to help either deal with pain or to help with injuries. But we will try to continually support the evolution of medicine because we believe it's good for our players.
The last question I had was sort of an ode to the Giants fans out there who have a long, cold winter. We've got one last video clip to show, and then I want to ask you about it. If you could play the last clip. So as you said, you're a fan of the game, not just the commissioner. I'm curious, what's the single best play or the single best game you ever saw?
Wow, that's a tough one. David Tyree is actually working in our office and is a wonderful young man. I mean, and he's working in a lot of these areas with trying to help our players and transition them through life. That's a classic play. Whether you're a Giants fan or not, that was a great moment. But one of the things that makes the NFL great is that every week there's another great moment. There's something special that happens on that field. It's unscripted. It's pure joy. It's triumph, and I love seeing that. Whether it's the individual achievements or the team achievements, and this season's been maybe one of the greatest seasons we've ever had. And I feel like I say that every year, but it gets better and it gets better. And as a fan and as a commissioner, I love to see that because it's developing passion in our game, and we're seeing more and more fans enjoy it.
Take some questions from the audience. The first one here is, do you believe fantasy football has positively affected the way we consume the NFL?
Yes, because I think it's brought more people into the game. One of my favorite stories was getting a letter from a fan who said he's got a 14-year-old daughter, and we all know about fathers and their relationship with their daughters. Maybe during those years, sometimes they can get tense. And he said, we sort of separated, but fantasy football brought us back in. Now my daughter and I are playing in a fantasy football league, and we're playing against other father-daughter teams, and it's been the greatest thing for our relationship and brought us back together again. That's a cool thing. And it's a small thing, but it's important. And again, it's what I mentioned to you before about bringing people together. But fantasy itself, it has clearly helped create interest all the way through the season. So even if your team isn't playing well, meaning the Giants as an example, or any of your teams, you're still following your fantasy league, or you're following it on the Red Zone or on your mobile device. So it has created more interest for a longer period of time. But it has a change where you're not necessarily rooting for your team as much, you're rooting for your fantasy team. Those are two different things. And thankfully, we haven't seen a drop-off in any kind of viewership, in fact, an increase in viewership, or passion for their teams. And I think that's what's important long-term. Keep that passion for the team, not just your fantasy team.
This question says, sometimes when I watch a game, I feel like I'm watching commercials and a football game breaks out. Will we someday see the Bud Light Super Bowl?
No, we're very proud of the fact we really don't have any commercial identification on our fields. We take that area, and it's very important to us. We have some commercial identification in the field for products that are being used, like a Nike on the uniform. But I don't see that, and we love the idea of trying to balance the pure joy of that game and the way it's presented, while we still recognize that there's a sponsorship opportunity and an advertising opportunity. The reason why, and I think what's unique about the NFL, is that we're on free television. Every one of our games is on free television in the home markets. That's unique to professional football. And it's important to us because more and more people can enjoy it for free. But that comes with advertising. So it's important for us to continue to be successful on broadcast television. In fact, seeing that while there are changes in the media world, and there are significant changes in the media world, there may be more and more people that are moving away from paid television or cutting the cord, but they're staying on free television. They want to use free television, and that's where we are. So we have partners in the cable and the satellite world, but we also have very important partners in the broadcast world.
When you say every game's on free television, are you including ESPN? Monday Night Football?
Because we put it on the home and the free market. In the home markets, we put it on free television. So in New York, when you have the Giants game, it's on ESPN, but it's also on Channel 11 here, as an example, or another channel. That's to make sure that we're making sure that the home fans have the opportunity to see it on free television.
Is the NFL ready for an openly gay football player?
Yes. There may be. I don't know. But the answer to that is yes.
This question is about, it says, what is your favorite part of the job?
Well, I already mentioned the draft, and I put that up very high. It's an event when you can be part of a young man realizing his dreams and the start of his career. That's a special moment, and I love that. I also love being part of something that so many people enjoy and having that responsibility. What do we do to ensure the game continues to be successful, that fans continue to enjoy the game, that we make it as safe as possible for the players that play it? I have a dream job in that sense. I'm doing something I love to do, and I've loved football since I was 6 years old. Whether it's because of the strategy or the beauty or being a part of that game and being a part of its success in a small way, that's a dream come true.
You'll love where this question comes from. It's from Alex Benton in Australia. You might not like the question. So Roddy White, who's a receiver for the Atlanta Falcons, once described your leadership style as, quote, like a dictatorship. How do you respond to that?
Well, I haven't really met Roddy White. I think he's a great player and he's a great individual. The commissioner's job comes with a lot of responsibility. It comes with responsibility to discipline clubs, owners, people that people like to say I work for, and I do, but I feel like I work for the game. I feel that my responsibility is to the game. And you make tough decisions, whether they're to discipline players, to discipline coaches, to discipline owners. Your responsibility is to that game of football. And I realized very early on, you can't make everybody happy in this job, but you have to be thoughtful. You have to listen to all perspectives. You have to try to make the best judgment you can and realize that when you do that, there are going to be some people on the other side that aren't going to necessarily agree. And you mentioned earlier that I really can't do an awful lot without 24 votes. That's not a dictatorship. That's someone has to work very hard to build consensus. We have to bring the players together to agree on a collective bargaining agreement. We reached a 10-year collective bargaining agreement with our players, unheard of in professional sports when we did it. And that's because we have worked very hard to build consensus and to reach agreements that are beneficial to all parties. And while I know that there are some decisions that people won't agree with, I respect that. But I also have a difficult job to do sometimes, and not everyone's going to agree.
It's interesting you said you don't know Roddy White. Do you know many of the players well?
Yes.
Yeah? Or do you need to keep any kind of distance since?
No, actually, I just met with 10 players today, as a matter of fact. I speak to players. I communicate with players on text. I'm very proud of the relationship I have with many of the players. But I don't know all the players. We have 2,000 players, and some of them make judgments without ever having the experience of one-on-one. And that's something that just happens. Happens in the media, it happens in the public. And I respect that. People are going to make their judgments based on what they see, but I think when people have the experience of dealing with us, dealing with me, they'll recognize that I listen carefully, and I try to consider all views.
I'll give you two more here. Do you believe that the New England Patriots' response and actions in the wake of the Aaron Hernandez murder case was sufficient? And furthermore, what role should the NFL play in investigating the background of current and prospective employees?
Well, the New England Patriots, when they found out the circumstances, acted very swiftly and removed him from the team. And now it's a matter of law, and he'll face those consequences. Everyone evaluates the players when they come out. They obviously evaluate them as players and talent, but they also evaluate their backgrounds to whatever they can legally do. And they have to make judgments about how are people going to adjust to the NFL. And those are always decisions that individual teams will differ on, or they'll differ on where the value is. And I'm assuming that many teams will continue to reevaluate those standards and hopefully make the right decisions going forward.
Do you think that case has implications? Do you want it to have implications for how teams vet their players, or do you see it as isolated?
I think it's very important for teams to pick players that are going to represent their organizations properly. I think character is a big part of our game. It's a big part of our responsibility. We have a responsibility to the fans. When people are fans of the New England Patriots or any team in the NFL, they spend their valuable resources, their time, their money, supporting the franchise. And we have a responsibility, whether you're a player, a coach, commissioner, owner, you have that responsibility. And I want players to recognize it, I want coaches to recognize it, and we all carry that shield. And when we tarnish that shield, it is not good for anybody.
Question on that. When a player gets fined by the NFL, where does the money go?
It goes to one of three charities that are determined between the union and the NFL. So there are three charities in particular where the money goes. Sometimes it depends on whether it's an on-the-field infraction versus an off-the-field infraction. And we put a lot of that money into research.
And is that process, when the weekend ends and you see on TV we might get fined for that? I mean, is that a part of the process that you dread at all? Do you look forward to that?
Well, here's the good news for me, Ben. I'm not really that directly involved with it. We have a former player, Merton Hanks, who played for the 49ers, that makes the decision about whether somebody is fined for an infraction, whether that's everything from an infraction of the rules using an incorrect technique, or whether it's even to the point of a uniform code infraction. They issue the fine, and if the player determines to want to appeal it, then we put that in front of another former player or a former coach who makes that determination. So I'm not directly involved with that. Obviously, when I'm watching a game and I see something, I don't like to see infractions of any rules, whether they're safety related or whether they're anything that would reflect poorly on the NFL. Those are decisions that are made by our staff, and I think they do a terrific job of it.
Well, you've been very generous with your time. When we were waiting to come out, I said everybody here expects you to be handing out Super Bowl tickets. And you laughed just like you did there, no commitments. But anyway, thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you, Ben. I enjoyed it. Thank you. Thank you.